I would like to thank you all for attending this first lecture series celebrating the impact of Harvey Gantt. We also hope that you attend this Thursday's lecture series featuring Julian Owens, followed by Friday's panel discussion with Mario Gooden, all taking place here at Lee 111 at 5 p.m. Next, I would like to thank Dr. Ufuk Urso and Clarissa Mendez for their guidance and leadership in putting this together. To Professor Sally Hambright-Balut for coordinating and managing this project. To Denise Demeach for her assistance to the installation of the exhibition. And to my fellow colleagues who made this happen, thank you. Next, I would like to present to you our first guest speaker, Sekou Cooke. He is an architect, researcher, educator, curator, born in Jamaica and based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. He is the director of the Master's Program of Urban Design at UNC Charlotte. His work has been published by the Art Connect, the Architects newspaper, the Charlotte Observer, Syracuse.com, and Curbed. His practice, Sekou Cooke Studio, is grounded in research, emphasizing both a broader cultural context, intended use, improvisational potential for projects. The work of his studio is centered on the exploration of hip-hop architecture, an approach to contemporary design that embraces hip-hop culture and applies its shapes, structure, and ideologies to the built environment. His studio has completed design commissions for master plans, multi-unit residential developments, commercial buildings, interior renovations, tenant improvements across the United States and internationally. Key recent projects include Grits and Griots, the forthcoming of Syracuse Hip Hop Headquarters, the Los Angeles Department of Building, and the Safety Standard Plan. This work has been explored through his writings, exhibitions, and lectures. It is the subject for the monograph, Hip Hop Architecture, and it Close to the Edge, the Birth of Hip Hop Architecture, which was first mounted in 2008 at the AIA Center for Architecture in New York. His work has also been featured in the landmark exhibition, The Reconstruction, Architecture and Blackness in America, featured at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, in spring of 2021. Sekou Cooke received his bachelor's from architecture from Cornell University and his master's from Harvard University, and is licensed in New York and North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, Sekou Cooke.
And that's you. Thanks, Eduardo, for the introduction. And thanks, David and Sally, for being gracious hosts, and the NOMA students for inviting me here. I know you all tried to get me here last year down in the Charleston campus. That didn't quite work out, but I heard you got a really, really good sub. Kim Dowdell is nobody to sneeze at. She's a friend of mine, luckily, and also a really, really amazing person. I'm happy to be here to kick off this lecture series on Harvey Gantt. I don't know, I have to admit, I don't know that much about him. I got a chance to meet him briefly last year at an opening of the show in Charlotte around Phil Freelon's work. And I also remember us talking about him back in undergrad in the 90s when he was just becoming the mayor of Charlotte. And I also, I also remember that, he's someone to really aspire towards being, like having the impact that he's had for this school and this area of the country by being an architect and an architecture student and a politician is really quite transformative. And it reminds me of a palm reader who told me recently that I should avoid being a politician no matter what I do. So I'm not going to follow in his footsteps too closely. I do, I just moved from Syracuse a couple years ago, which I guess is a big Clemson rival in sports. And now I run an urban design department in Charlotte, which is now you are our major competitors there as well. So hopefully this won't be too adversarial today. Okay, so a lot of the work that I talk about these days is a little, it's what's the right word? It's engaging, it's compelling, exciting for me to present it. However, it's work that's more like a retrospective of the last couple of years. If you know anything about how long it takes to produce architecture, to produce works of architecture, you know, the stuff that you're working on now isn't going to be seen for 2 to 5 years. So it's more of like a history lesson than what I'm actually working on now. So I hope to give you a little taste of that at the end, but really the first part of the lecture might be stuff that you've seen already. We have a pretty good footprint on YouTube, and there's a massive AV section of my website. So a lot of this stuff you've had at least the opportunity to watch and see. So hopefully it's not too repetitive. And I'll try to present it in different ways as well. So maybe solicit a few different kinds of questions. And the Q&A is always what's most important. So let's go. So hip hop architecture, this is what you all wanted to hear about. And I'm super, super, super thankful right now that it's not this crazy novel concept that people are still asking me, what is hip hop architecture? Now we can start to have deeper conversations. And if you want to know, the one thing you're not allowed to ask is you're not allowed to ask what is hip hop architecture anymore. That's not a question that I tolerate. But I'll tell you a little bit about the background of it and where we are, how I came to this point, and where it's going. So this will just be the first little bit. So this is not the first thing I read about the topic, but it is something that I influenced some of the early work after I had written my first piece in 2014 on called The Fifth Pillar, A Case for Hip Hop Architecture. Then more of this work started to come to me. This was Kara Walker's show that same year, 2014, called Roughneck Constructivism. And this is a show about including primarily visual artists, videographers, installation artists. But in her description of it, in her primary essay, she was talking about looking for or being in search of a theory of architecture that's based in this hip-hop rude boy ethos. And the only other essay in the publication was by Craig Wilkins, who's also an architect. So it was really powerful to me to see her really digging into what the nature of the relationship between a hip-hop rude boy ethos, antisocial roughneck ethos, had to do with architecture. So, and I was positing at the time that hip-hop architecture is that theory, is that movement that she was in search of. And so in almost 2 years ago now, has been published this book, the monograph Hip Hop Architecture, and that was really at a culmination of about 8 years of work. I didn't invent the term hip hop architecture, I didn't come up with it. If anyone has claim to that title, it's Nate Williams, who did his undergraduate thesis in 1993 at Cornell, calling it hip hop architecture, and nobody before then had ever seen anything like it. It blew everyone away. It won all the thesis awards. And my entry into the whole topic started in 2014 when I was reminded of my early days at Cornell and thought this was something that, you know, with Kanye putting his name in the mix, this was something that people wanted to hear about. And so I wrote that piece. I thought it was going to be the end of it. I thought I would never have to touch it again. The response to that was so powerful that I put together a symposium in 2015 at Syracuse, invited 12 people to talk about hip-hop architecture. I thought that would be the end of it. I did an exhibition a few years after that in 2018 to answer the question, what does hip-hop architecture look like? And I thought that would be the end of the topic. The truth is it's not ending anytime soon, at least not for me, and it's now impacting the many parts of my practice, which you'll see a bit of today. And of course, the exhibition that opened in 2018 in New York is now in Atlanta, and it's getting more press and more attention and more rave reviews than it ever has. So it's something that I think people are really ready for, and it's opening up quite a lot of avenues of conversation. So I'll take you quickly through the book, through how it's structured. If you haven't read it or if you don't own it, you can. It's still available. So it's organized in 4 primary volumes, and each volume has a series of tracks, which are essays, about 1,000 words to 2,000 words a piece, opening up all of these different conversations around the topic. The first volume is a kind of an introduction, and starts out before the manifesto a disclaimer, and this disclaimer is where I really set the table, starting out with the statement that this book is not for you, it's not for architectural academic elites, and it goes deeper into the explanation of that. And it ends with the statement that I'm not a hip-hop architect, I'm not even a black architect, I'm an architect. And even though that definition of what the term architect means is explored in different ways in the book, it may not look like the same thing that you think architecture looks like. So the second volume is where we get heavier into the theory. This is the more academic part of it. This is how I slid this into the academic category of books. And it really is where we are laying down most of the larger topics like race and gender, which are very, very powerful and heavy topics that we have to confront head on in both in architecture and in hip hop. And nostalgia is where we talk about all of the different theories and philosophies that we've had in hip hop architecture over the last couple of decades. But it starts out with this idea of legitimacy and authenticity, which are important both in architecture and in hip hop. Who do you have to legitimize yourself to? Who do you have to, which gates do you have to cross? Who are the gatekeepers of each of these industries? And although I've been fighting for several years around the notion of defining hip hop architecture, because like hip hop architecture seeks to defy definition over and over. I do have a definition here that, a longer definition of connecting hip hop to the cultural phenomenon, not just the musical genre, and talking about architecture as a socially impactful pursuit that needs to be connected with the human experience. So if hip hop is our dominant cultural product, then architecture should be reflecting hip hop. And then the Reader's Digest version of that title or that definition is that it's hip hop culture in built form. The third volume is where all the pretty pictures are. This is where all the work is, all the experimentation into what hip hop architecture could be or might be or has been. I keep having to remind people that I'm not the arbiter of what is or isn't hip hop architecture, but this is important for people to explore and see what might be possible, what might fit into this category. So it includes work by Lacan Jafus, who is one of my good friends and one of the most powerful visualizers of this work. The original thesis project by Nate Williams at Cornell. Some work by some of my own students from Syracuse, looking at breaking down gaps in a musical piece and gaps in a community. Or this one, thinking about graffiti as a coded language and how it can transform a landscape or a surface within an active street in Washington, D.C., to contemporary thesis projects. This is a thesis project in 2019 by Mauricio Zamora at UC Berkeley, where he's had now a volume of work to reflect on and to reference since those of us in this area have been working with it on hip-hop architecture, myself, Craig Wilkins, and others. Then professional work like this from Stefan Malka, who is a pretty affluent and influential architect in Paris right now, but started out as a graffiti artist, and a lot of his work references his early graffiti work. This is obviously, or might not be that obvious, but it's referencing the Krylon logo of the spray cans, or work by other graffiti artists like Delta, who works in the Netherlands, and he's transforming his work from the simple two-dimensional surface and now engaging three-dimensionality and works that people can actually engage. And then people, and you'll notice none of these people are licensed architects, right? So people like Theaster Gates, who is a world-famous painter, sculptor, and ceramicist, and artist, installation artist, but his dad was a roofer, and so he has this really intimate connection with architecture. He did a Loeb Fellowship at Harvard GSD, and he's creating spaces like this. He's transformed a whole section of the south side of Chicago by creating projects on his own without the right permits or permission, but transforming a bank into a library or an old house into a performance space. And instead of getting violations from the city, the mayor comes to him and asks him, what is he doing and how is he doing it, right? This, to me, is the embodiment of what hip-hop architecture can and should be. This project is a temporary installation he did in Bristol in the UK in using sampled materials in an old bombed-out church. This project is done by architects. This one is City Thread by Sports in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so not too far away. And I was finally able to get a chance to see this in person last fall. The fourth volume of the book is all of the tangents and speculations, all of the other pieces that might be related to hip-hop architecture but aren't necessarily grounded in hip-hop. And the first track is really about hip-hop artists that somehow engage in design practice in one way or another, and asking the question, if it's a hip-hop artist produces architecture or design, is that necessarily hip-hop architecture? So, of course, Kanye is the only one who gets his own chapter. This is his visit at Harvard GSD, where he spoke with a few of us and then spoke with a large group and then took us all to his concert in Boston. We also talk about Afrofuturism as a design movement and its relationship to hip-hop architecture, informal settlements and how their methodologies might connect to hip-hop architecture, and what I term neo-postmodernism. This is a newer movement of younger professionals, but they work similar to the postmodernists, but they use terms like remix and mashup and sampling to describe their work. So this is work by Jennifer Bonner of Mall. So I'll go a little bit deeper into some of the work that I've been doing within this realm, starting with some research that has been ongoing for a number of years and still has a couple more iterations to it in hip-hop technology. And really, it starts with the notions in this quote that hip-hop is this Hip-hop's approach to technology is always about humanizing the technology, making the technology do things that it wasn't supposed to do. And it all starts with the first thing that, thinking about DJs as the original hackers of technology, putting these things together in ways that they were never supposed to be put together, and doing the one thing that your mother told you never to do, which is touch the records with your fingers. And that one move of touching the records with their fingers transformed a passive consumption device into something that's an active musical instrument, right? So that attitude towards technology is something that we can easily transpose into architecture, and that I've been very interested about, and I write about in the book as well. I also refer a lot to Jay Dilla, who was a master at humanizing technology, humanizing all kinds of musical technology. And you can see, this is a shot in his studio, you can see like a keyboard in the background, and even an old iPod, if you remember what those look like. So I'm gonna play a little clip from a video on Jay Dilla.
So let's talk about Jay Dilla's drum style first.
He figured out how to humanize the drum machine by avoiding certain things that he could have done to make it more robotic, make it more stiff.
For instance, the MPC has this incredibly useful tool called quantization.
What quantizing does is it takes your performance. Let's say I'm playing my drum pattern. And when I'm playing it, sometimes it's a little ahead, it's a little bit behind.
If your kick drums are off by a little bit, quantization snaps them in place.
And so a lot of producers, they use quantize, not as a crutch, but they just weren't thinking about not using it. And so Dilla was like, yeah, I'm just gonna turn this off.
The result is a discography full of incredibly off-kilter drums. This loose drumming style was incredibly influential.
So the next slide, I'm gonna play a track that you can kind of hear this in an example of this, not with a drum, but with a sample word, baby. The track is called Baby. Interestingly enough, he changes the word maybe from the original track and manipulates it so that the word maybe sounds like the word baby. And you can see the word baby gets cut and manipulated a little bit.
Let's go. Turn it up. Live niggas throw it up. It's the official. We got the bag for you. Go.
You can catch Guilty Simpson at a rave with babes, packing a 38 snub and a razor blade. Love shit in a major way. I beat your dog's ass like Flavor Flav. Thug niggas with guns beneath leathers. If you know better, keep your bitch on tether. Niggas got snow like cold weather. And big money clips cause it fold better.
So you can hear the baby there going in and out in different places. This is a kind of typical Jay Dilla humanization of these machines. Another grounding ideology came from this piece from Amiri Baraka. I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but this is his description of a typewriter. And this was written in the 1960s, and he writes like people text today. But he's talking about the kind of banality of what a typewriter does. And if he were gonna invent an expression scriber, it would have the ability to use everything, not just your fingertips, but your elbows, your feet, your head, your behind, and to make all the sounds that you want, like screams and grunts and taps and itches, right? So all these things that you could actually change the technology to create something much more human. And in the end, he just says like a typewriter is corny, right? So this is where we founded the ideology behind this project, 3D turntables. And it started out with research money from Autodesk. And it started out in a seminar class where students were manipulating and testing out all these different architectural fabrication tools. So basic questions like what happens if to the physical object when in the software you change all of the settings so that it minimizes all the support material. Things start to fall apart, or things start to get produced in different ways. Or this next one, which is asking the simple question, what happens if you laser cut a non-planar surface? And then you get all these different effects that are really ephemeral that you never expected to come out of a laser cutter. And then this, from that class, it went into my studio in the summertime to kind of focus that research and to see what else we could get out of it. So we focused in on the 3D printer, and we bought a whole bunch of these really cheap $200 monoprice 3D printers because we knew we were gonna break them. And so this is what my studio looked like for most of that summer with all these 3D printers going, and they did break quite often. So what we did was first try to understand putting in a simple primitive into the 3D printer and then manipulate the printer, disrupt it as it's coming out. So the first experiment was called a scratch. And the first thing we do is print out a 1.5 inch cube, and then we draw it to make sure that we're documenting the process like responsible architects. And then the first thing is as the print is coming out, we shift the nozzle part way, and then we document what that does. And then we shift the bed, the print bed gets shifted while it's being printed out, and we document what that does. And then we print it with the fill only and turn off the shell, or print it with the shell only and turn off the fill. And we try to experiment with what that does. And so we start to get examples like this, right? And the next one was called a spin. So we're like, okay, how can we get a little bit closer to what the DJ is doing? How can we spin these things? And so we created a separate bed on top of the print bed to then rotate as the print is coming out, right? And this is all the same primitive. It's the same cube. We didn't model anything more than just that one cube, and then you get results that look kind of like that, right? And they're all really small, so the photography isn't that great, but you get a sense of what starts to come out of this. And then the crossfade is where we had those 3 printers going at the same time. We had them each printing 3 different primitives, and we used something kind of like a cube because you have to measure the difference. And then midway through, we would switch beds from one to the next. And then we get results kind of like this. So this is what the crossfade started to look like. And then after that, we put it all in a matrix so that we started to categorize what the effects are that we get from that. And then started to think about how do we start to apply this in something much more useful? How do we get to something more of the architectural scale? There are multiple pathways. We just chose one for the first part of the experiment and looked at some of these dilapidated houses on the south side of Syracuse that were underused. These 2 were right across from a building that I had built a few years before, and thought about how can we use these as, and these are all slated for demolition, so how can we use the demolition of these pieces as a kind of performance act to be part of the whole experiment. So now the houses become the primitives, and then we print those and draw those, and then we take them through the same series of shifts and change and scratches that we did with the cubes. And we start to get examples like this. And also we did some rotation and some fill only and some crossfade, and with the shell only as well. And so we get this whole matrix of different possible effects from those 2 houses of things that can happen along the way. And we propose this as a kind of performative demolition that also becomes a kind of asset in the community as it's coming down. And this drawing has been published in many places and has been in a few different exhibitions as well. And this is really where this is going, and where we're speculating on it is connecting it to some of the work of maybe Gordon Matta Clark, who's been of interest to me since I was an undergrad, or some of these fantastic images by photographers, Philippe Dujardin or Xavier Delory. Next, I'll talk briefly about this ADU project, ADUs 1s and 2s. The LA Department of Building and Safety started a standard plan program a couple years ago now. Has it been? Yes, a couple years ago now, and basically they're allowing people to choose from a list of pre-designed, pre-approved accessory dwelling units that they can build in their backyards or behind their houses in an expedited way through LADBS process, which takes several months to get through. In actuality, this process has only cut off a few months out of that multiple month process, but we're happy to be involved. It's primarily LA-based firms that were involved in the pilot program. They invited myself and 2 other East Coast firms to be involved. And so instead of starting from scratch, I thought, let's start from, oh geez, I didn't realize that I did that. We'll start from scratch. Don't laugh too hard. So we started with the 3D turntables idea, and thought maybe we chop up a standard house section into the living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and then use that as the place for rotating it. And this is a kind of static, boring form of what we were doing with the actual 3D printer, but at least it's one step in the right direction to see what we can actually build and realize in the short term, and then see where we can go from there. So the first one of these is getting so much closer to being built. It always seems so close, and then it steps a little bit further away, but that's just the nature of the game. Okay, so reconstructions. I'll talk a little bit in depth about this. This is the next project. This was the part of a show at MoMA, again, just about 2 years ago now. I think it opened January 21st of 21. And, oh, was it January or June? Or June was the closing, sorry. Yeah, I can't even remember now. It's COVID time, it's all kind of flexible, right? So Reconstructionist Architecture and Blackness in America was part of a series on issues in contemporary architecture that MoMA has been running since 2011. Some of these other titles you might recognize: Rising Tides, Foreclosed, Uneven Growth. This one was curated by Sean Anderson and Mabel Wilson. And I was selected as one of 10 Black architects to be a part of this. So these were individual commissions, independent commissions grounded in individual cities across the US to ask the question about what is the nature of Blackness and architecture in this country, and how can we envision that for the future. And of course, I heard Mario Gooden is going to be part of this lecture series, so that would be a good bookend for the whole week. And I'm going to play a little introduction video to that show.
It has been really hard for brown and Black people to imagine a future in this country.
It's been a real challenge because Black people in America are not given the space to even just be.
In in order then to think about possible futures, somehow we have to reimagine ourselves in new places and then find ways to get there.
We're not just interrogating America's history with Blackness, we're interrogating architecture's history with Blackness. So to interrogate architecture's history with Blackness, I chose Syracuse, New York, a city that I was very familiar with at the time. And it was not on the original list of 10 cities that they asked us to select from. But the history of Syracuse is the history of Blackness in America. This is a shot of what the downtown of Syracuse looked like, an area called the 15th Ward, which was the hotbed of Black entrepreneurship and business in the area at the time, up till the 1950s. And then, of course, this happened in the mid-50s. You all have heard about urban renewal, or hopefully are learning about urban renewal in your classes. And this happened all across the country. And in Syracuse, it went right through the center of the city. They're still debating it. They still have lawsuits, ridiculous lawsuits about it happening right now, trying to stop the removal of this viaduct that goes right through the center of the city. Of course, it goes right through the Black neighborhood. So this is an aerial view of this area of Syracuse. This in the center foreground is an area owned by the Syracuse Housing Authority called Pioneer Homes, one of the oldest public housing projects in the country, and in the state of New York as well. Beside it is McKinney Manor, another housing project that replaced a previous housing project that was there. This is the Civic Center of Syracuse. This is the Everson Museum, which is quite famous, an IMPA design. All of this was the 15th Ward at one point. And then up here is all of the medical universities, and Syracuse University is further to the right. And you can see I-81 cuts not just through the center of the city, but also cuts through the center of Pioneer Homes. So Pioneer Homes was built in 1938, and then now the Pioneer Homes exist on two sides of I-81. So Blueprint 15 is this effort that was started by the Syracuse Housing Authority and a few philanthropic organizations there. And they are basically looking at all of that area with the viaduct coming down, saying, how can we really redevelop all of the low-income housing that's happening here? The trouble is that instead of developing low-income housing, the current model is to develop mixed-income housing. And what that means is now there's going to be displacement again. And so even on the original Blueprint 15 website, this statement is no longer on their website. They've taken it down since then. But they're talking about being proud to be partnering with purpose-built communities, and the Atlanta's East Lake as this model of success in what purpose-built communities have done. When you look at East Lake community, it has a beautiful golf course, great school, a lot of people succeeding there, but only about 20% of the people who actually lived in the low-income housing before were able to return after the new development happened. Actually, a measure of success is anywhere close to 25% returning. So now what they're doing is they're basically reliving the same mistakes that have been made in the past. We're about to remove people, relocate people once again. The number of units is the same as what was there before, but instead of low-income housing, it's now mixed-income housing. So, I also have a couple of quotes that I used to guide my process through creating this project. This one from Catherine McKittrick, who's talking about the history of this country is grounded in black bodies being placed and displaced over and over again. That we have almost never in this country had the agency to say where we could live, right? It's always, this is where you can live, and for now, until we displace you and place you somewhere else. Or this quote, which was more salient to me from The Wire. This is from season 3, episode 1, where they're tearing down the project buildings where they used to sell drugs out in front of. Just really gets at the heart of it, that they're gonna tear this down, they're gonna build something else, but they don't really care about people, right? So the drawings that we started to produce first looked at the area and discovered we had this really beautiful discovery of all these old original drawings of pioneer homes. And if you look closer, you start to see that dotted in from the pioneer homes is all the outlines of where all of the individual tenement row houses used to be. So now we have this trace of history that we can draw from. And so these are some more of those beautiful drawings. And then drawings of McKinney Manor. Again, this is 2 layers of public housing that were torn down over time. So now we have all these layers of history that we get to draw from. The title of the project was called Wiaucha, Hip-Hop Fabrications and Public Space, named after this track from Ace Hood and Lil Wayne, called Wiaucha. And I'm still not, I've been in the South for almost 2 years, still can't pronounce the word Wiaucha. I've been corrected multiple times. So these are some of the drawings that we produced for the show at MoMA, or the base layers of the drawings at least. And what we did was overlap all those layers of history, and where they intersect is where you get these little pavilions of public space, and the big gray or white rectangles are a kind of prototypical or projective construction into the future of what purpose-built housing may build, right? So we took the standard number of units, figured out what that volume was, distributed it without designing it, and then overlaid it onto the plan. So it's almost an intentional non-design. So this is what it looked like a little bit closer, and where they start to overlap, we start to get these intersection moments between the new proposed and what was there before. And so we can see these become these subtractions within that volume. And even the plans were not designed. The plans were sampled from plans of Atlanta's East Lake homes and put together and figured out with a standard egress system, and then layered together with the intersections of the traces of what was there before. And then this was complemented with a few sections, and where you can see the relationship between this public realm pavilion that is activated in a certain way, has images of what was lost, what was there before, and then this new mixed income housing that's there. And then collages of the highway, collages of the history of the site. And then each of these drawings, the last layer was a hand screen print on top of each drawing with those original drawings that we found from the Syracuse Housing Authority. So this was how they all came together. This is the 9 square of it all. The next piece, the second piece of the 3 pieces that I had in the show was larger renderings of what those spaces might look like, and the activated ground plane, and this kind of non-ghost-like under-inhabited housing complex, and what that might mean, and then superimposing the quotes on top of that. And because I'm an architect, I have to draw a section. So we have the section and elevations throughout the whole thing. The last piece of the puzzle was this, stoop, because the stoop, as you know, is a really important part of Black culture in America. When we have these intersections, then you have these really interesting moments where stoops get chopped in diagonals in weird places. So to replicate that, I took the stoop from my own house that I had in Syracuse, the backyard. I had to pay a few $1,000s to get it rebuilt. But this is the piece of stoop that we cut off, and we brought it all the way to the shop. Built the supports with these layers of plywood that then have these subtractions in it to represent a kind of middle scale of the 3-scale model. So the steps are the 1-to-1 scale, that's the middle scale, and the smaller scale is these little models that sit on top of it, made out, 3D printed and laser cut. And then the last middle scale piece was this little chunk of concrete. And yeah, every time I talk about it, I never point out the fact that this is actually the rebuilt, that's the rebuilt back stair right there. So you can see they did a pretty good job. And this is how the whole thing came together. So that stoop took up a spot in between all the images, and this is the piece as it sat in the show. And then moments like this are what I really love, when people are actually touching the thing, sitting on it, stepping on it. And there was an interesting moment here where I had to talk to the security guard who was trying to tell him not to do that. I'm like, no, it's okay, I made it, it's all good. Another interesting side note, maybe, yeah, I started saying it already, might as well just say it. That piece, along with the other pieces from the MoMA show, are now being held by the Smithsonian Museum, National Museum of African American History and Culture. I've donated the big stoop piece to them because nobody else will take it, it's massive. And then the other pieces they're currently considering acquiring. So, okay, the last project I'll talk about is Grids and Griot. And this is an installation that I did at the end of 2021 for the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And the biennial that year was being run by David Brown, or curated by David Brown, who has this theory called the available city, that if you take all the empty lots that are across the city of Chicago, mostly accentuated within the west side and the south side, that would be the size of an average mid-sized city in the United States. So there's a whole city that's available within the city of Chicago. And so I grounded my attitude towards this based on the chapter that I wrote in the book called Grids and Griot, understanding the history of the grid in this country and what it really means to the Black body. So I'm going to play another clip here of Mos Def talking about the grid.
If you look closely, you'll notice that the pattern on this soft broadcloth shirt is made of working man's blood and praying folks' tears. If you look closer, you'll notice that this pattern resembles tenement row houses, project high-rises, cell block tiers, discontinued stretches of elevated train tracks, slave ship gullies, acres of tombstone.
So all those things that Mos Def was listing there, or Yassine Bey, as he's now called, was listing there, they're all representing this emblematic of this pattern, this woven, gridded pattern, but they're all spaces of oppression. So the first and virtually every interaction that the Black body has had on this hemisphere with the grid has been a symbol of oppression, starting with the slave ships. where you're packed into the hull in a grid for efficiency. And so in the book, I break down all the ideas that the grid is not this neutral tool that's being used in architecture all the time, and that the postmodernists especially wanted to strip of identity, or strip identity and culture out of architecture. But it is something that Black bodies have a very, very different relationship to. So if you think about public housing buildings, public schools, and prisons, they all have the same basic gridded structure, brick, chain link fences, and bars on the windows, right? Compare that or contrast that with the griot, who is a traditional figure in West Africa, who's kind of a storyteller, sometimes a healer, an entertainer, a minstrel of sorts, but always a keeper of all the oral traditions of a community, on all the oral legacies of a culture of a people. And then they're compared here by Adam J. Banks with the DJ. Like, he wrote this book called Digital Griot, talking about the DJ as a modern day griot, because they, through digging through the crates, they are holding this historical musical legacy of a people and reminding you of it or introducing you to it, that things that you may not have known, by sampling it and bringing it into contemporary music. And he also talks about storytellers, preachers, poets, stand-up comics as also emblematic of these, or representative of DJs as well. So our partners in this project was Young Men's Educational Network, YMEN. They're an organization in Chicago that hire young teenage kids to do different projects around the city, and they have a number of initiatives. They have a couple of empty lots that we're using, so they fit within the available city theme. And this is the lot that we're given. And to the lot to the north of that, they had this big red shipping container, and inside that, that's their bike box. They collected bicycles from the community, they restored them, fixed them up, they rent them out, or actually lend them out to people to have bike, like slow rolls across the city. They teach people how to fix bikes, and it's a really community engaged activity. And the other side of that, they have these planter beds where they're planting these specific kind of peppers that they bottle and sell. So they also had a graphic design department, SAIC, come up with this color palette for how to paint that shipping container. They ended up only using the red and the green, but we were very interested in this color palette. And also the idea of the grid, which is, so the grid is ubiquitous in Chicago. It is one of the quintessential gridded cities in the country, in the world. Right across from the street, this is a beautiful example of the grids, of multiple layers of grid that I found. The shipping container itself is this kind of grid, this 8 by 8 by 8 times 40, or 8 times 5 volume, right? And so we wanted to start there with the shipping container, mirroring the shipping container that's already on the site, and thinking about this 8-foot by 8-foot grid on the site, chopping it up as a DJ might in non-traditional ways, spreading that out, separating it to create inhabitation, cutting the tops off and shifting it out to allow people to move through, and then bringing in different flat panels to finish off the programming of it, and then fixing that onto concrete beds. So some of them had to get anchored down into concrete, some of them sat right onto the ground. And then so the programming of the whole space started with a bike box, additional bike storage here, more planter beds, a performance space, seating areas, bench areas, and then informal kind of kiosk areas. And then we used that same color palette and painted the inside of the shipping container to contrast with the outside of the other one being painted, and then left the outside raw. So the fabrication of this was super easy. I thought it was going to be much more complicated. We just sent a drawing to the metal fabricator of the shipping container. We had the container delivered there. They cut it in like 2 or 3 days with a grinding saw, and then lifted it all and dropped it in place exactly where it needed to be. All we had to do was go back and anchor it into the concrete, paint it, and then finish off the plywood panels. So to do that last little bit, we collaborated with the actual kids who are part of the YMN program to do all the painting on site. Most of them had never painted before, so they had to learn how to paint. And this is the director teaching them how to paint. They painted all the plywood panels. We installed them in place and painted some of them in place. This is Heather, who was working in my office at the time, helping to do the installation. This is what it looked like when it was all painted. And then they just happened to have all this planting soil ready to go the day we were there, the last installation day we had. So we installed that. We had some filler soil from the other project that was beside ours, which was Soil Lab. Soil Lab was supported by the Danish embassy. And so we had these flowers, planted it, and it was a really great way to open it and finish it off. You can see the Soil Lab in the background. That's the other project. This is me having my magic moment talking to the press, my little celebrity moment. These are the people from the Danish embassy who, again, their project was beside it, but this is where they came to do their photo shoot on our project. And this is one of their children. The project, as I flip through these images that, a few other random images that I took and liked, nobody else seems to like these. At least my staff doesn't like these, but I like them. This project was supposed to be a temporary installation up until December of 21, but it's still there and still being used quite frequently by the residents. Okay, so not going to keep you very much longer. I think only lost about 7 people so far, so hopefully the rest of you online are also still here with us. As I said at the beginning, the most interesting stuff is the stuff that we're either working on now or about to start working on or thought we were going to be working on now but hasn't started yet because, that's just the nature of the beast. Things just take longer than you think they're going to take. But that's the stuff I really, really want to talk about. And of course, I kind of can't talk about them as much or in the way that I would like to talk about them. Some of them from, relative like NDA kind of things. And other of them just because it's irresponsible to talk about things that hasn't fully happened yet, but I'm going to talk about some of it anyway, just to give you a little bit of a preview. So one is a project in DC for the DC Housing Authority, and we're we're actually rehashing some of the tools and techniques that we used in the MoMA Wiaucha project. To do for real, like in real life. And the idea is that we're taking this housing project in the southwest area of DC where they're going to relocate people and build something new there. They're doing it as responsibly as they can because they're getting 100% of people placed into housing. But what happens is before they demolish something, the buildings stay there for somewhere between 2 and 3 years before they actually are demolished, before they build something new. So that's an opportunity for us to design a temporary use for that space. And 2 to 3 years of temporary use is quite powerful. And if we do the project the right way, then whatever we do here hopefully will influence the designers of the public permanent, not the public, the permanent structure to do things a little bit differently. So these are a few studies of what we're doing there. Yeah, I know I went through it quickly. And this is a different project that we're doing in Western North Carolina. And this is a really complex development chart. But this, if it works the way that we think it's going to work, could be a revolutionary chart, could completely change the way that we approach low-income housing and developing low-income housing, where we're actually empowering the end users, the people who are going to inhabit the housing, and make them part of the development model. Make them actual part owners of the development entity so that they can actually gain some of that a little bit more equitably. Okay, so these are a couple of early studies of that. So, it's just a 10-unit building, but we imagine that it'll be designed in a way that's really modular so that we can actually work directly with each of the homeowners to customize this design in a way that suits their own needs. Most of us live in houses or apartments that are designed for a man and a woman living together with 2.5 kids. That's just not the way that the majority of us actually live. So where's the housing that's designed for the single mother with 3 kids? Where's the housing that's designed for a woman living with her mother and her daughter? Where's the housing that's designed for the couple that come together that have 12 kids between them, right? So this is the model that we're trying to do to have it flexible, because these are our real clients. And that experience of working directly one-on-one with an architect is to design your own home is an experience that almost only like 50% of the top 1% ever get to do. So the fact that we're doing it for the low-income residents, I think, is incredibly empowering. So this stuff we can skip through pretty quickly as well, because it's nothing. So, but this last image is the first community meeting that we had. This is on the actual lot where we're going to do the project, and you can see this is also an educational moment between the white residents of this community and the black residents of the community talking. And this is a picture that we hope to keep replicating as the building is built and as the building has its life. So that's it.
Okay, there we go. Thanks a lot for that fascinating lecture with so many different projects, so many different approaches, so many different scales, so many different. And I learned a lot. I am sure, and sorry, but I can assure you that those 7 had to left because they have a early class tomorrow, and this is kind of a typically late time for us in the lecture series. So I'm sure you have quite a lot of questions. I have a few, but I would like to have the students to ask first for sure. So who? There you go.
Can you hear me? And if anybody online or recording. Okay. No, ask the question, I'll repeat it.
So a lot of these projects are very impactful and they have awesome design, especially
So the question is about low-income housing and customizing individual units for low-income housing, and what kind of hurdles we've encountered with those projects. Well, you start out by saying that these projects are impactful. This is where I get really itchy and nervous, because I don't know what impacts they have yet. And this is why I feel like even though I research and I lecture and I write, I feel at my core I'm an architect at heart, in the purest sense of the word, because to me the test is always in, does it get built? And what happens after it gets built, right? So that project is so early that we don't even know what those challenges are yet. We don't even know what those hurdles are yet. I can tell you what the hurdles are that we're facing right now, which are 100% about funding, right? So how do you fund this model? How do you get there? And so that chart was a way of me trying to figure out how to do that creative financing, and thinking about how do you build something for $300,000 or $400,000 and sell it for $200,000, and not have it considered to be subsidized. So the money has to come from somewhere. So we're creating a whole structure for donation and foundation funding and even potential investment, so that money goes into one place to offset the cost of what that is. Right now, we had originally thought that the tenants or the residents, the homeowners, would qualify for about $200,000 for each unit, but now they're qualifying for like $170,000, $150,000. So that creates another gap that we're trying to fund. So we're just now solidifying how to close that gap. So it's just about and this is what developers do all day, every day. This is the cost of the whole project. This is how much funding we have. This is how much the bank will lend us. This is how much tax credits we can get. What's the gap, and how do we fund that gap? And if we can fund the gap, the project's a go. If we can't fund the gap, we look somewhere else. So we're looking at funding that gap. But the other way that it's being subsidized, I guess, is in our own work, because I do a lot of things that are so far outside of the standard scope of services that the AIA writes in their contracts, right? I would say, there's 5 or 6 different services that don't show up anywhere in any of those contract documents. But I believe as architects we have to do that, because our end goal is to get the project built, right? So if we're just sitting back waiting for the phone to ring and then saying, okay, yes, we'll send you a contract for our standard services, and assume that everybody's gonna be educated enough or well-funded enough to do the things that they need to do in order to get us paid on time and us to just deliver architectural services, then none of these projects would ever happen. These projects need so much more educating people, investing in just finding fundraising and structuring all these things, and then the fact that we are going to work or willing to work one-on-one with each of the residents to customize that, not fully customize, but customize enough within a certain range to have them feel ownership and feel a little bit of agency, is something that we're doing above and beyond. We're still getting paid. This is our standard services, but we're gonna do all these other things in order to make this project so much more powerful. Over here. Better not be. So how does someone doesn't feel connected with hip hop culture find out more about or dip your toe into the realm of what hip hop architecture is? First of all, everyone needs to understand their relationship with hip hop culture, understand how it affects their lives. Because I made a statement earlier that hip hop is the dominant culture of our time. That's a really broad statement. I say it because I believe it to be true. It has impacted so many facets of our life. If you've ever said the word lit or woke, you're affected by hip hop culture. If you've ever worn Beats headphones, you're affected by hip hop culture. Or large headphones walking down the street and you're not in a studio, you're affected by hip hop culture. It affects the way we talk, it affects the way we dress, it affects the way we buy products, it affects the way we see each other. It's not just about the music, right? And even the music itself, the music has infiltrated all other parts of music. It's changed musical technology across the board. No matter what music you're producing, you are using musical technology that has been impacted by hip hop culture, by hip hop music. So your first question is, what is my relationship with hip hop culture? How do I understand it? Do I sit outside it? Do I sit inside it? Do I sit on the periphery? Is it impacting me? Am I impacting it? And that is the first step. And then secondly, understanding what's your cultural identity? And then third, how is your cultural identity showing up in the architecture that you're producing? If your cultural identity shows up everywhere you look, in all the banks and churches and all the schools, everywhere you go, then you have nothing to worry about. Then you're set, right? If you get up every day, walk around a city, look at your environment, even in your own house, like many of us do, and realize that you are being affected by a culture that is not at all yours, then you know that there's something that you have to change, right? So this is what drives people like me to this work, because there's an inherent understanding that 99% of architecture is produced through a singular way of perceiving the world that comes from a Eurocentric tradition. So if you connect with that and you're producing that, then you have nothing to worry about. If you think that this stuff is cool, then that's great. You can see it as cool. You know, I think Japanese Shinto shrines are cool, but I'm not trying to produce any, right? So you can see it, you can understand it, and you can feel a respect for it, and you can understand how it connects to yourself, how it's impacting you, and how you can impact it. But it doesn't mean that it's something that you have to aspire to produce yourself. Make sense? Thanks. There you go. Yeah, so this is a question I get quite a lot. It's about the regional impact of hip hop culture and how that, and the regionalism of architecture and how that might translate into the work around hip hop architecture. That's something that I'm incredibly fascinated by, and is impacting and shaping some of my work right now, especially with my transposition from the Northeast into the Southeast. And again, this is my first time really visiting a lot of these cities, a lot of these places, a lot of these schools, being a new transplant to the Southeast. And you know, things are very, very different here in many ways. I haven't yet fully immersed myself in answering that regionalist question about hip hop architecture itself. And to be honest, it's not high on my priority list right now, not because I'm not interested in it, not because I don't think it's important work to do. It's because it's just a lot of work. And I also have a lot of work that's happening. And you know, when I wrote the book, as I said before, I wanted it to be like the last thing, but it's not really the last thing. It's really creating a foundation, a baseline. It's said something the other day that I think resonated a lot, that it's meant to be open source, right? That now this is the codes. These are the codes for understanding it, creating it, interpreting it, finding your place within it, and then hopefully it inspires other people to build off of it. And I'm really, really happy to just sit back and watch what happens from there. And you know, it's providing, more than anything else, it's providing a starting point that we didn't have 30 years ago in school. We had many starting points. We had a lot of people to read from. We had Cornel West and Bell Hooks and people to draw from. None of them were architects, right? None of them were thinking about the same types of things that we were talking about. We had the people talking about all the culturally relevant stuff, and we had the people who were talking all about the architectural stuff, and none of them were talking the same language. So in the last 30 years, there's been a lot of scholarship, a lot of work that's setting that foundation, and now it's time for people to build on it. But I mean, I talked completely around your question. Sorry, I didn't really get at it.
I'm curious, I'm from Charlotte myself, which is, the city's treating me well.
It's a great city. I love Charlotte, yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's open, still open for enrollment, for application, by the way.
I'm curious the ways that are you looking at the city and the issues in the city and trying to solve those urban issues with your program? How's that starting?
So the questions about the Charlotte Urban Design Program, and which I know you have a great one here, but I encourage all of you to apply. And whether this approach is impacting the city there or the program there. I have to say that this is the primary reason they brought me there, I believe. That, and to be honest, I wasn't really in the market for another academic appointment. I was kind of ready to invest myself more heavily in other things. But Charlotte presented me with a small program, a nimble program in urban design, which, as you know, doesn't require licensure or accreditation. It's, not through NAB at least. So there's a lot more you can do with that program. And I think the original desire was from them was for me to imprint myself onto the program. I've been a little bit slow at doing that because I just, I'm hesitant to turn a big university program into a reflection of one person. There's all these other factors and faculty and curricula or curricular things to think about. So, however, it has impacted the program in many ways thus far. The way I taught the first semester of urban design, the fundamentals this past semester for the first time. I didn't do that the first cycle. And a lot of these ideas are at the core of what we're doing. And they're ideas that are more generally about looking for other ways of addressing situations in the city that you never thought about, looking at underused spaces, underused ideas, underserved communities, allowing people to understand what standard typologies and models are, but always having them think about how do we break those and how do we think divergently about them. And so that's now at the core of the program. It's not a hip hop architecture program. It is there is a seminar, an optional seminar class that I'm teaching this semester on hip hop urbanism, which all my urban design students are in, or almost all of them have done. So it's in there, and I am making inroads with other institutions and organizations within the city. I've yet to meet the mayor, but I think it is a way that through the program and through my general presence of being there, and through some of my professional work, some of these ideas are getting into the ethos, they're kind of, toxifying the waters, if you will. So we're not solving problems, though. We're not solving problems. And that's something that I state adamantly all the time, that especially in my architecture studios, I'm like, if you're here to solve problems, you're in the wrong place. We're not solving any problems. We're understanding conditions in the world and recommending other ways of approaching those conditions. If you're trying to solve a problem, you're setting yourself up for failure immediately, because you're always going to be judged on whether you have fixed that problem or not. Presenting different ideas, doing things differently, that's always open to interpretation. In the back.
Yeah, so it's kind of like hip-hop architecture, but one of the words that kind of stood out was sampling.
Yes.
So like it's a big part of hip-hop, Kanye especially. It's like taking what other artists produce, kind of recreating it.
Yeah.
Like its own way, not necessarily like making it better, but like recreating it.
Yes.
It's usually like a song that's kind of familiar. It's like it's kind of older, or like not always older, but is that like a big part of hip-hop architecture is like taking familiar projects and kind of recreating them?
Yeah.
Its own like aspect in its own hip-hop way.
So the question is about sampling and whether sampling is a core part of hip-hop architecture. Yeah, and by the way, Kanye didn't invent sampling. He may think he did, but he didn't. He's very good at it. He was very good at it. And he made his name before he was even a rapper as being a producer. But yeah, absolutely. So sampling is at the core of hip hop, not just the music. If you look at hip hop fashion or hip hop dance or graffiti, they're always borrowing from other cultures. They're influenced by legacies that some of them come directly from the African continent. Some of them come from the prison system. Some of them come from gangs. Some of them come from just like cool, chill party music. Interestingly enough, musically, disco and hip hop have had a parallel trajectory. They were happening at the same time in the same space. It was just like whether the club was downtown or uptown, right? Almost sometimes the same DJs playing disco one night and then playing hip hop the next night in a different club, right? So and this is why the point about the griot is so important, that these DJs are essentially this treasure trove of information. They have studied musicology in a deeper way than almost anybody else. They understand all of these different musical influences and tracks and things from really obscure places. One of Afrika Bambaata's earliest hit records was sampled from this crazy German electronica group called Kraftwerks that nobody had heard of before. he also famously peeled off all the labels off his records because he didn't want anybody to know what he was sampling. So, you know, understanding and knowing the deep legacies of the musical culture is so at the core of what hip hop is. So the question is, what can we learn from that as architects? And these are the questions that I pose in the book and in my lectures and in my classes. Not how can we take that and translate it one-to-one into architecture, but how can we, like, what can we learn from it? There are multiple things that we can do. We can do some of the things that I showed those photographers did, like Philippe Dujardin and Xavier Delory, where you're literally taking pieces of buildings and mashing them up or collaging them together. We can embrace collage as a technique in architectural design and production that has been lost over the last 20 or 30 years that I'm bringing back into my classes. Not necessarily a hip hop technique, it's an architectural technique that we haven't been using very often enough. We can think about understanding that deep, deep knowledge of our architectural legacies. Again, not just from the Eurocentric lineages or from Japan, but from the African continent, from South America, from this place that we're actually here. Like the Native Americans had a really deep architectural tradition, right? In so many different ways, right? From the longhouses to the teepees to the igloos to the Mayan and Aztec cities, right? There's so much history for us to learn from and for us to be inspired by and for us to sample, right? We have to know that first. And a lot of these DJs are virtuoso pianists as well. They understand musical culture. They understand the fundamentals of music. They understand pitch and tone in a way that that most people don't. So some people get shocked when they come into my studio classes when I'm preaching about how they need to know how to draw by hand and they need to learn all these fundamentals. Like, these are essential, right? Some of it has to do with my Cornell programming, but it's still incredibly fundamental. An architect who doesn't know how to draw is like a musician who doesn't know how to read music, right? Like, you're not communicating in the same language as everyone else. So yeah, all the sampling stuff is great, but it has to be based in a deeper historical knowledge. So the question is always, what can we learn from this, and how can we interpret it and apply it, not just how can we replicate it. Okay.
So thinking about some of the work you've done, really thinking about changes over time, specifically in neighborhoods, thinking about moments of erasure, displacement. I'm curious to know, like, what dialogue that may have sparked with city planners, urban planners, government officials, like, if any, I don't know.
In my work?
Yeah.
So the question is about all the erasures and displacements in these cities and whether it's sparked dialogues amongst city planners and agencies. My answer is that I'm hopeful still. I'm hoping that it has had a deeper impact than I'm fully aware of right now. See, the thing is that I feel like I'm more an evangelist than a preacher, right? I feel like I'm out spreading the good news rather than teaching people dogma about what they need to do. So at best, I feel like I can inspire change and I can inspire different ways of thinking. I would love, you know, whenever I do have the opportunity of getting in front of people, I am making those arguments as clearly and as unapologetically as I can. I'll cite one example, which isn't really a resolved thought, but so the Syracuse Housing Authority, who I talked about before, They just, they're on their third round of RFPs. The first for the exact project that I was talking about, the exact project that I was discussing how to challenge. And the first round of RFPs, I didn't even hear about, nobody even told me about. I was for housing, designing housing in that area. To work for purpose-built communities, who's the developer on the project. And in the meantime, this work from MoMA had a second life in Syracuse at that Everson Museum, that IMPay Museum that I showed you. So last year, middle of last year, that work was shown there in its own gallery. It had its own opening. It was, and all these people participated. And if you're in Syracuse long enough, you know who they are. They know you. You're having conversations with them. You know, I would walk through City Hall, and the mayor would say hi and call me by name. So they know my work. And then I didn't hear about the second RFP until a white firm in Ithaca called me and asked me to partner with them on the submission. So yeah, so I'd like to think that the argument's getting through. I'd like to think that it's being impactful. I'd like to think that it's changing minds on that level, but it you know, things like that are still happening. And I didn't partner with that firm for the RFP. I actually put together my own team and put a submission for the RFP, and I aggressively and clearly stated, well, not too aggressive. I clearly stated what our approach would be. That it wouldn't be just like, oh, we can design this nice educational center and everybody's going to be happy. It's like, this is the type of change that needs to happen in this area, and it's based on all this research and this work that was in the Everson recently and was in MoMA before that. Yeah, we didn't get a call back, so. On that note.
Is there any last question?
Yeah. Yeah, we're losing people.
So with that, I'd like to thank Sekou for the great lecture.
Thank you.